Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever watched a master clinician spot a severe internal illness just by shaking a patient's hand or looking him in the eye? It's like a magic trick, right? But it's not magic. Today, we're doing a complete clinical masterclass on exactly how you decode those external features of systemic disease. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to decode external disease signs, dive into clubbing and the platelet theory, figure out central versus peripheral cyanosis, trace the bilirubin pathway in jaundice, distinguish reactive from malignant lymphadenopathy, and then tie the whole shebang together with clinical reasoning. Okay, Section 1. Decoding external disease signs, the body's hidden messages. Let's start with why checking the outside of a patient is the absolute bedrock of physical diagnosis. You know, even with all our advanced MRI machines and massive lab panels, the surface of the human body is still this incredible, real-time monitor of internal health. Think of these external features, the peripheral stigmata, as a literal dashboard of warning lights. By learning to read them, you can pinpoint issues in the cardiovascular, respiratory, or gastrointestinal systems before you've even ordered a single test. All right, Section 2. Clubbing the platelet theory. This is a classic finding that every medical detective absolutely needs to know inside and out. So, what actually is clubbing? Primarily, it's defined by the loss of that normal angle between the base of the nail and the nail fold. Try putting the backs of your index fingers together side by side. You should see a tiny kite-shaped gap. When that gap is gone, we call it Shamroff's sign. The fingertips start looking like little drumsticks, and the nail bed gets this really weird, boggy, spongy feel to it because of underlying edema and tissue growth. And spotting this is never just some random anatomical quirk. It is a massive red flag for a systemic disorder. When you actually see this selective bolus enlargement at the distal ends of the fingers and toes, you've got to start thinking systemically. It's a proliferation of connective tissue that demands a serious investigation. The crazy thing is just how broad the causes are. We're talking respiratory issues like bronchial carcinoma or fibrosing alveolitis, cardiovascular problems like infective endocarditis or cyanotic heart disease, even GI conditions like cirrhosis and Crohn's disease. It is truly wild that a diseased gut or a failing heart shows up right at the very tips of your fingers. But that begs a pretty big question. How? Why on earth does a problem in your chest literally change the shape of your fingernails? For decades, this had doctors completely stumped. Well, the 1987 platelet theory offers a brilliantly logical explanation. Normally, these massive cells called megakaryocytes break down into smaller platelets in the lungs. But if there is a disruption, say a right-to-left cardiac shunt or severe pulmonary inflammation, these giant cells completely bypass the lung's filtering system. They cruise into the systemic circulation, physically get stuck in the tiny capillaries of your digits, and boom, they release platelet-derived growth factor and vascular endothelial growth factor. That's what triggers the tissue expansion and vascular permeability that gives you that boggy nail bed. Makes total sense, right? Moving on to Section 3, cyanosis, central versus peripheral. Let's break down the mechanics behind this super vital visual clue. Cyanosis is that unmistakable dusky blue discoloration of the skin or mucous membranes. Clinically, it pops up when a patient has more than 50 grams per liter of deoxygenated or reduced hemoglobin flowing through their veins. It's a glaring visual alarm that tissues are starving for oxygen. And interestingly, it actually shows up more easily in patients with polycythemia than those with anemia. Now, when you're confronted with a cyanotic patient, your immediate diagnostic dilemma is this. Is the whole system crashing with a global failure in the heart and lungs, or is this merely a local plumbing issue in the peripheral blood vessels? It really comes down to contrasting central versus peripheral. Central cyanosis means the arterial oxygen saturation is fundamentally tanked, usually from severe lung disease or congenital heart shunts. Because all the blood is hypoxic, it turns everything blue, both the skin and the warm mucous membranes, like the tongue. Peripheral cyanosis, on the other hand, is just sluggish blood flow out in the limbs. Tissues extract way too much oxygen from perfectly fine blood. The fingers turn blue, sure, but the mouth and tongue, totally spared. And here is a fantastic bedside trick for you. Just gently massage or warm up the patient's hand. That naturally boosts local blood flow. If it's peripheral cyanosis, that simple act will completely reverse the blue color. But if it's central cyanosis, warming the hand isn't going to fix the lungs. The blood is still lacking oxygen, and that blue tint will stubbornly stick around. Okay, Section 4, jaundice, tracing the bilirubin. Let's see how this clue decodes liver and biliary pathologies. Jaundice, also known as icterus, is that visible yellowing of the eyes, skin, and mucosa. But get this, it only becomes visible to the naked eye when plasma bilirubin hits about 60 micromoles per liter. To put that into perspective, that's roughly 2.5 to 3 times the upper limit of normal. Because mild cases are super easy to miss, checking the scleria, the whites of the eyes, in natural daylight is absolutely crucial. Categorizing the jaundice is the secret to finding the culprit. You have 3 main buckets. First, is it prehepatic? Like red blood cells breaking down too fast, causing unconjugated bilirubin to spike? Second, is it hepatocellular, meaning the liver cells themselves are taking a hit from a virus or alcohol, which you'll see as massive AST and ALT enzyme spikes? Or third, is it cholestatic, a physical roadblock like a gallstone or tumor? In these obstructive cases, conjugated bilirubin spills into the urine, making it dark, while less gets to the gut, leaving the stools distinctively pale. Which brings us to a massive clinical pearl you just have to know: Courvoisier's law. If your jaundiced patient has an enlarged, palpable gallbladder, but they have absolutely zero pain, you should immediately suspect a malignant obstruction, like pancreatic cancer or cholangiocarcinoma. Why? Because regular gallstones usually cause the gallbladder to scar and shrink over time, so it's not going to painlessly distend like that. Let's hit section 5, lymphadenopathy, reactive or malignant. Time to figure out what those enlarged nodes are really telling us. Now look, the vast majority of swollen lymph nodes, especially in younger folks, are simply reactive. They're benign responses to upper respiratory illnesses or viruses like Epstein-Barr. But we always have to stay on high alert. Telling the difference between a simple reactive node and one infiltrated by lymphoma, leukemia, or metastatic cancer is quite literally a life-saving triage step. So how do we know when to biopsy? We use clinical algorithms that rely on very specific variables. Retrospective data shows that the predictive value for cancer absolutely skyrockets if the patient is over 40, the node is located in the supraclavicular region, it's bigger than 2.25 square centimeters, and, this is key, if it feels rock hard and is completely painless. And the textbook example of why anatomical location matters so immensely is Virchow's node. If you feel a hard, enlarged node in the left supraclavicular fossa, right above that left collarbone, it is deeply concerning. Because of how the lymphatic system drains from the abdomen via the thoracic duct, finding this specific node points directly to a primary cancer hiding out somewhere in the GI tract, like stomach or bowel cancer. Finally, section 6, clinical reasoning in practice. Let's try all these incredible clues together. Every sign we've discussed today is just one piece of a much larger diagnostic puzzle. Using structured frameworks like DAPSI helps you systematically check for all of this during an exam, ensuring you don't miss clubbing, central cyanosis, painless jaundice, or even subtle signs like peripheral edema. Physical diagnosis truly is the ultimate medical detective story. You don't always need a $1 million scan to crack the case, so the next time you look at a patient's hands, eyes, or neck, look closer. What hidden systemic diseases are just waiting to be uncovered? Keep your eyes sharp, and I'll see you in the next explainer.